Wake Up to Money from BBC5Live.
Hello, welcome to Wake Up to Money. Coming up, would you support private investment to build better rail links? We're taking a look at the week's biggest stories, everything from NHS funding to the winter fuel payment cut and
the first ever commercial spacewalk.
And at the bottom of the mobility is progressing.
we will be looking at the future of space tourism. So would you take a flight into space?
Wake Up to Money with Felicity Hannah.
Very good morning to you. Welcome to Wake Up to Money on Friday, the 13th of September. Lucky for you, we've got a packed show ahead. We've got some fantastic guests to talk to. But I want to talk to you. There's a big story making all the front pages this morning. The news that a ban on junk food adverts being shown on telly before 9 o'clock in the evening is going to happen. It's going to come into force on the 1st of October next year. The government's confirmed that now. And it's playing differently across the different papers. So the Times has got junk food adverts banned before 9 p.m. to take weight off NHS. I don't think they're punning there, but that's what it says. And then the Daily Mail has got a big splash. Nanny Starmer's ban on junk food ads to save NHS. PM unveils 9 p.m. watershed on TV adverts and total ban online. I don't want to hear what they think. I want to hear what you think this morning. Get in touch. Labour says this ban would be enforced alongside a total ban on paid-for online adverts. And the plan is this would tackle childhood obesity. And this is something the Conservatives had previously wanted to do. They'd committed to the ban, back in 2021 when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. That ban was then pushed back to give industry more time to prepare. So what do you think? Is it the right way to tackle the issue? Is it the nanny state? Text me on 85058. Send me a WhatsApp message on 08085 909 693. And on social media, use the hashtag WakeUpToMoney. And I will try and keep across that, hoping to hear from you this morning. And hoping to hear, of course, from my guests throughout the programme. I'm joined by Douglas Hanson-Luke, who's Executive Chair and co-founder of Future Planet Capital. Douglas, good morning.
Good morning, Felicity.
Now I'm going to butcher some of the other names now. So you're a venture capital company. You've backed a lot of privately held UK firms, including Vaxitech.
Vaxitech.
Right. I'm glad you're here. Tokamak Energy and others. Did I at least get Tokamak right?
You got Tokamak exactly right.
It's good to know. Thank you for being with us. Joining you this morning, Douglas, are Jane Foley, Head of FX Strategy at Rabobank. Jane, good morning.
Good morning.
And Dr. Steve Nolan, Lecturer in Economics at Liverpool John Moores University. Steve, hello.
Yeah, good morning, Felicity.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being with us. Loads to talk about. Let's just talk about junk food, though. Douglas, I'd love to know, do you have a strong opinion? Is a watershed ban on junk food advertising the answer?
We heard earlier it's World Blame It on Someone Else Day. It's really important in Britain that when we say the NHS has got problems, it's falling apart, that we do something about it. And not putting on extra weight, eating unhealthy food and then asking other people to pay for us to sort it out when we're older is bad. So anything that allows us to actually lead healthier lives is a good thing. It's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for the other people that have to look after us later on.
85058, if you agree with Douglas. Steve, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because Douglas is right in some ways. Our health does play into the cost of running the NHS, and that plays into exactly how much cash is sloshing around for everything else.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I kind of agree with Douglas to a certain extent that, it is about considering the kind of what we economists would call the external cost of eating badly. It's not just as bad for your health because we have a public health service. There's a kind of social cost towards it. But I do say sometimes kind of these things, there's a tendency with the government now, there's a lot of talk about banning things, which kind of, for me, surprisingly brings out my own libertarian side a little bit more than I'd like.
Interesting. I mean, this is the question. Is it nanny state or is it just sort of common sense? Jim in Bristol says, great to see the government taking some action on obesity. Jane, of course, this has already been kicked down the road previously over concerns about what it might mean for industry or giving industry time to prepare. And the food industry is a big voice here in the UK.
It is indeed, and in fact, most of the bank I work for, most of its clients are in the food and agri sector, and of course will be affected by this, as well by things like sugar tax, etc. That said, if we look at the UK economy, we know that there's an awful lot of people, for instance, in their 50s who are out of work, who cannot work because they're on disability. There's large queues for the NHS, people in their 50s, yet we all know that the NHS is under strain. And of course, issues such as diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is linked to poor diet, obesity, are factors within this. And I think, yes, it is a nanny state. No one wants to live in a nanny state. But at some point, I think the government does have to take action. And I think it is interesting that, the Labour government is doing this. But as you mentioned, this was something that was previously mooted by the previous government. So I think really the statistics suggest they need to take some sort of action.
And we'll be talking about the NHS in our handy look back at the week in just a moment. And what is quite interesting is there's that sort of focus on could more be done in terms of preventative measures to save costs coming further down the line. And I suppose something like this, Jane, is a preventative measure that doesn't actually cost the government any money, doesn't cost the taxpayer, but might reap a dividend.
Indeed, and it's all a part of, I think, re-education, and I think this is going to be, really important for us to get our health back in order and therefore have a better workforce and become more productive and have better growth for the economy, which would, raise the wealth for everybody. So it is part, I think, of a bigger holistic picture for us all.
OK, well, let's look then at that report into the state of the NHS yesterday. It was the Lord Darzi report, and it warned that the NHS is in critical condition. It cited declining productivity, ballooning wait times, awful emergency services. And it was followed by this from the Prime Minister.
The NHS may be broken, but it's not beaten. As the report says, the NHS may be in a critical condition, but its vital signs are strong. And we need to have the courage to deliver long-term reform. Major surgery, not sticking plasters.
Oh, vital signs, major surgery, sticking plasters. There were a lot of NHS puns in that 20 seconds of audio, weren't there? Details of the shape that these long-term reforms might take are still kind of unknown, still slightly up in the air. But the PM has confirmed it will focus on the transition to a digital NHS, moving care from hospitals to communities and, as we were just talking about, focusing efforts on prevention over dealing with sickness. And he was very strong, wasn't he? There'd be no more money without reform. Steve, there's a lot going on, and the NHS feeds into lots of different parts of the economy, doesn't it? Productivity seems to be, at the centre of a lot of our economic problems, and people being unwell, that can contribute to a lack of productivity. But also within the NHS, we seem to have a productivity problem. Why aren't we getting as much bang for our buck?
Well, I mean, if you look at the report, one of the key arguments they make is basically a lack of investment over the last couple of decades. Essentially, they estimated, I think, that like 4.3 billion was transferred from capital budgets between like 2014, 2018. And, it's kind of basic, just economics 101. If you're not investing on capital, then you're going to get less out of your labour force in that respect. We're kind of 37 billion pounds short of investment in the last decade compared to peer countries. And that shows in the state of the capital estate. I mean, I was quite shocked in the report to say that kind of 20% of the estate is basically predates the birth of the NHS and like nearly 80 years old. So you have some buildings that are crumbling, you have some amazing new hospitals, but in general, the kind of capital estate is poor. There's not across the board good equipment. And that all feeds into the day-to-day working conditions of the staff. I think one of the interesting things that Lord Darzi said, the effect on that is because there's a reduction in probability, there's not a reduction in demand. In fact, there's kind of been an increase in demand. We have an aging society. And he talks about how that kind of crushes the enjoyment of work for the staff and kind of leads to demoralised staff, leads to kind of greater sickness. And these kind of things are all obviously limiting the efficacy of the health service, which, as you say, then has spillover effects into the wider economy.
It was fascinating, wasn't it? Something that stood out for me in the report was that hospital staff numbers have increased since the pandemic, but the number of appointments and procedures actually haven't, because patients aren't flowing through the hospitals as they should. Steve, are there any... Oh dear, am I about to, before 6 a.m, ask you to fix the NHS? Are there any reform-shaped kind of silver bullets that could solve a lot of these problems?
Oh, I mean,
because I reckon the government would like to hear them.
I will try and fix. Yeah, I mean, I know there was the statement that like there's no money without reform, which kind of suggests that there should be some levers to pay, and okay, but if the situation is so dire and if you have kind of such poor working conditions, then I think, you've got to be realistic. And I think the government can say there's no money without reform, but realistically, politically, there is going to be money for the NHS service. Now, they've kind of recognised that in kind of accepting the pay review body's recommendations on pay to pay for people. But I think, making the NHS enjoyable, not the right word, but like getting the most out of staff as much as they can. I know these people work extremely hard, but making their lives just a little bit easier has got to be some help in productivity.
Douglas, we should, when we're talking about something as political as this, we should make it clear that you're also actually, alongside the day job, the busy day job, you're a former Conservative parliamentary candidate. So I suppose your colours are nailed to a particular mast. But I'm very interested to get your perspective on this. The NHS really struggling. As an investor, do you feel that it just needs more money? Do you agree with Lord Darzi's suggestions about digital reform? Where do you stand?
I think you'll love this bit because, I think Keir Starmer's done exactly the right thing. He's talking tough in the first days of his administration, where he's got the majority to get things done and to say difficult things. We at Future Planet are investing in technologies, and there are so many that can actually make a difference. So Lord Darzi, talking about digital, has hit it on the nail. There's one company in our portfolio, Navinio. They did a study 8 years ago showing that productivity could be improved in the Manchester hospitals by about 90%. 90, simply by having the right doctors, nurses, hospital porters and equipment in the right place. They've got an Uber for people and things that can work indoors. It's great technology. It's British technology from a female founder at Oxford. A good company. But because the NHS is actually a collection of trusts and clinical commissioning groups and all the rest, the rate at which it's rolled out is glacial. So the government doesn't necessarily need to spend more money, although that's welcome. But we've been spending more money on the NHS and having more people in the NHS for a long time. If we can have reforms that allow the NHS to use technology, the best in the world, a lot of which is in Britain, and then take that forward, we will become more productive in the NHS and people will be happier.
Jane, what about market reaction? Does the market move based on what the NHS is up to?
Not to this sort of news. When you're more likely to get a reaction is potentially on the individual drug stocks, if there is news with respect to that, because the NHS, of course, is potentially a massive, great big purchaser. But it does, of course, feed into the overall outlook and the overall idea about the UK economy. And right now, I think where the NHS keeps on coming back to feature is within the labour market, because you've mentioned productivity several times, and productivity, as you've already pointed out, is a significant concern for anybody investing in the UK economy, because it has been so low in the UK, and until we can get our workforce more productive, we can't really anticipate that we're going to get the strong growth rates that Keith Starmer is wanting. So the NHS is part of that, trying to repair the issues that we have with our workforce and trying to get growth back to where it should be in the UK.
Douglas, I was looking, I love to read the Commons Library, the parliament.uk, just briefs and guides to stuff. It's always fascinating. And I was looking at their briefing on productivity, UK labour productivity, and there's this interesting international comparison. So in 2023, ranked on GDP per hour worked, the UK came fourth out of the G7 countries. So very, very much kind of middle of the pack. US was the highest, Japan was the lowest. What interested me was UK productivity was around 18% below the US, which feels like quite a long jump. What is it you think that the US is doing differently?
They've got a science and technology sector that actually embraces technology, that moves forward with it and applies it quickly. It's amazing. In Britain, we've got the biggest life science company in our economy. It's AstraZeneca. It's world class. We've got the top medical school in the country, and we've got £3 trillion of capital domestically, and we've got governments that are saying we should all work together. So we've actually got the right ingredients to boost productivity through technology. It's down to us here in Britain now to actually stop talking and to act. You know?
What would that acting look like, though? Because every government wants to boost productivity. That's key to growing GDP. And growing GDP is key to having more money to spend on the stuff that voters care about. So I'm going to ask you now. I've asked Steve to fix the NHS. So Douglas, fix productivity. What's the silver bullet there?
Steve actually talked about it. We need more investment. Now, the interesting thing is Britain's got £3 trillion worth of money in its pensions and its insurance companies. And yet, when you look at who's investing in technology and private markets in Britain, real long-term investments that will make the world a better place, actually, there's 16 times more coming from international pension funds than from British ones. So for a long time, British institutional savers, people managing our pensions, haven't been investing in our economy, and that holds back productivity. So we at Future Planet, who invest in companies coming out of universities and deep tech, we're running the government fund for that. We're now launching one that all people can invest in. Legal & General, Aviva, Phoenix, they're all doing the same for private markets as well. So I think there will be a change, but it needs to happen quickly, because if we're too slow, all of the best British companies doing this that will make a difference to productivity will actually be owned by foreigners and marketing in the rest of the world.
You used a phrase there, deep tech, and for listeners who've not heard that before, this is essentially startups where the business model is based on high-tech innovation in engineering or significant scientific advances. Feels like a term we're going to hear more and more about in the coming years. Now, yesterday also saw the publication of the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility's annual Fiscal Risks and Sustainability report. It's more of a page-turner than the name suggests, but the biggest headline from this 126-page paper was its projection that the national debt would treble over the next 50 years. Steve, models like this, I mean, you have to plug a lot of assumptions, a lot of estimates into it. And obviously, we're talking 50 years down the line. This is a long way off with a lot of assumptions. How worried should we be about that estimate?
I mean, we should be worried if we assume that basically no policy is going to change from March 2024 going on, which is where the model sets its kind of baseline. It's more kind of cautionary tale to a certain extent, I'd say, about what could happen if essentially spending continues to outpace revenue. So the report, what the report's really useful are kind of highlighting three main issues for the economy going forward, which are the aging population, which is climate change, and which are rising geopolitical tensions. And they see that basically that's going to lead to one of the big causes will be a rising debt trajectory. But again, this kind of ties into what we've been saying with talking about the NHS report, this idea of the aging population has a large effect on the economy. Essentially, old age dependency ratio, which basically means the amount of old people to kind of working age people, is predicted to go from 31% to 47%. So you're looking at kind of a large decline in economic activity. And just in the way older people are less healthy, just biologically, than younger people, that's going to put more spending on pressure. Essentially, we generate more tax income as people when we're younger, and we generate more spending when we're older. Now, there's kind of positive news in there as well as negative news, that like there's opportunities to be made there if we get the kind of investment into the NHS that leads to the kind of step change that the Lord Darzi is calling for. We could see improved health outcomes, could lead to, one of the best effects, obviously, is people are living better lives, they have higher well-being, but there's also more economic activity, less welfare spending outside of pensions, and higher taxes. And that could lower the kind of large projection by about 44% of GDP. The kind of bad case scenario is it could see it rise by 49%.
I mean, these are quite wildly different different ends, aren't they? Jane, we've seen the markets in the past, and I'm going to use a very technical term here. We've seen them utterly freak out about the potential for public sector debt to rise. But if this is something where lots of different countries are seeing, national debt increasing, is it something that the markets could learn to live with?
Well, I think markets like to have countries living within their means, and that is judged slightly differently in different countries. So, for instance, in the UK, we have what we call a current account deficit. Now, a nice way to think about that is that we have a deficit of savers, and we rely on foreign savers to plug the gap. And foreign savers can be a little bit more sensitive to news about that economy than if it was their own economy. So, for instance, if we go back to September 2022, which is, of course, the Liz Truss episode, when she announced unfunded spending increases, well, the owners of UK debt, the owners of the gilt market thought, we're not having that. And they ran away, basically. And the price of gilts plummeted and sterling went down against the US dollar to the lowest level ever. Now, some countries, if there is a current account surplus, so that if they have a surplus of savers, wouldn't be quite so sensitive to that. But at the same time, there would still be sensitivities. And, governments are under pressure to live within their means, because otherwise the cost of debt becomes really very high. And then a lot of the tax income which is generated goes on, financing this debt, which is undesirable. But, the solution comes back to the word productivity again. We need to increase productivity significantly, because if we come back to that ratio between the ratio of working people to old age people, because it's become so high and it's projected to worsen, what that means is that the taxes paid by working people have to go towards an increasing amount of old people, meaning that young people are increasingly likely to be under a massive tax burden unless productivity rises. And this is why investment is crucial, why the health of the working population is crucial, so people can stay in work for longer. And again, it's all part of this big picture that we are in the UK facing, but of course most of the Western world is also facing, because all of our populations are aging.
Douglas, venture capital tries to pick tomorrow's companies. I mean, some of those issues that Jane's talking about, that Steve's talking about, the issues we have with productivity, the changing demographic, the new technologies like AI sort of coming down the path towards us. I mean, are you looking at interesting ways for deep tech, for the private sector, to address some of these massive societal shifts?
Yeah, we actually see it as a huge investment opportunity. Solving the world's biggest problems is creating value, and that value can be translated into investment returns. And everything that we've heard today so far really links the importance of pensions and investment. So if we get investing in our pensions into things that are going to make the world a better place, into the technologies that are going to address that, we'll get better returns as we have an aging population. But for society as a whole, we'll be investing in things that reduce waste in heat and energy, that provide affordable, clean energy, which lead to better health outcomes. It's all happening, and a lot of it's happening in Britain. I mean, Darktrace is a great success story for us. DeepMind, which was sold to Google, another great success story for Britain. We just need to start valuing it and capitalising on it so that our pensioners benefit.
It's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Another interesting conversation is this question about banning junk food. And loads of you are getting in touch this morning on 85058. Dave in Anglesey. Actually, Dave has given the specific place in Anglesey that he's in, but I don't dare try and pronounce it before 6 a.m. Dave says food. Ultra-high processed food needs banning by the ingredients used. We need to be far braver. And he says, having recently been in New Zealand, they're doing their best to stave off the US-influenced diet. And the people seem far happier and healthier. It's tough as it means a total cultural change will be better for it. And Mark says, on obesity, to start with, stop giving children free bus passes and make them walk to school. Keep your thoughts coming this morning, 85058. Oh, let's have one more, actually, because Eddie in Gloucestershire says, Nanny State says pensioners, no junk food for you, but you can freeze to death because we're taking away your winter fuel allowance. Nanny seems confused. Eddie, thank you for that. That, of course, is a topic that has not left the press, really, and it's been back this week, this winter fuel payment cut. There was the vote on Tuesday. Some MPs tried to block this plan to means test the winter fuel payment. Essentially, the £200 or £300 benefit will no longer be universal. It's only now going to be available for people who receive pension credit. During Prime Minister's questions this week, the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, asked Sir Keir Starmer if he would publish the impact assessment of that decision. This was the Prime Minister's response.
The fact of the matter is this. They left a £22 billion black hole. And they hid it from the OBR. Richard Hughes is absolutely clear. It's the largest year-ahead overspend outside of the pandemic. Now, of course, when it comes to mitigations and impacts, we've put those in place. Ramping up pension credit, dealing with housing benefit and linking it, something the party opposite didn't do for years. And because of the tough decisions that we're making to stabilise the economy, we can make sure that the triple lock shows that increases in pensions will outstrip any loss of payments.
Well, there you go. Just part of the fiery debate around this issue. Jane, do you get the sense, we were talking, you were mentioning Liz Truss's mini budget earlier on. I mean, do you get the sense that this kind of decision is to sort of set out the stall as we will, this is a government that will take tough decisions and will keep that kind of fiscal spending and common sense in mind?
Well, I think if there is one legacy from Liz Truss's budget is it's taught all other politicians that they cannot make the same sort of mistakes because, for a start, they'd probably lose their job. So we understand that, that there has to be some degree of fiscal prudence. We've already discussed it's a good idea for any new government to get the bad news out at the start of its term rather than at the end when it wants to put out softeners to get voted in again. And in terms of the winter fuel, in many respects, we've already sort of discussed the outline around that. We know that we have too big a debt in the UK. It's about 100% of GDP right now, and we know that that can get worse. That refers back to the OBR report. And I saw a statistic the other day that said in the UK, 1 in 4 pensioners is worth £1 million or more. So from that point of view, you have younger families, households with this massively high tax burden paying for to support the older population. And you think, well, should these younger families with this high tax burden, many of whom have got very large mortgages because asset price inflation has meant house prices are so high when they have to pay a lot out for, nursery fees, etc. Why perhaps should the younger households be paying the blanket winter fuel allowance to pensioners, many of whom really don't need that money?
And I suppose many of whom do, who will probably get in touch this morning. We often hear from pensioners on this. 85058, if you would like to get your thoughts on that across. Douglas, what about you? What do you make of the cut?
It's a really interesting one. It's highlighting an important issue for us. I co-founded Future Planet with Norman Foster, the designer, the architecture, and he's passionate about housing. And he's passionate about waste. We've heard from Steve about our old housing stock, our old buildings in Britain. Jane has talked about what we can afford and what we can't. We'd massively support targeted work and transition finance to help make our properties retrofitted more efficient. Let's not worry about paying for wasteful energy. Let's actually invest to reduce wasted energy and target that not by age, but on the people that need it most.
It's the old "you've got to spend more to save more" issue, though, isn't it? And when there's not much money to spend in the first place.
I just don't want to interrupt, but for us, the biggest investment returns that we've made over the last 3 years are in climate change and energy saving. So yes, you've got to invest, but actually it's been the fastest returning sector, a lot more than you get on government bonds, or providing more debt to the government to subsidise.
Steve, the government came under a significant amount of pressure over this. You've been talking about those demographic pressures that the OBR has highlighted. I mean, is this that kind of difficult decision?
Well, it's definitely proving to be a difficult decision, at least politically. It's a lot of the problems seem to come from designing fiscal policy at speed. They kind of identified the horrible term of black hole, which that they think needs to be filled very quickly, and this is a way to do it. But I think a lot of the problems they're coming up for is they want to introduce to pay for the shortfall in this year's budget by this winter, but the way they're doing it in terms of allocating whether people get the payment or not is through pension credit, and there's kind of historically low take-up of that. So there's kind of going to be a lot of edge cases where people that should be entitled to it aren't. And just in general, it's kind of a sign of the messiness of tax policy and the lack of wiggle room the government's given themselves by pledging not to raise the kind of 3 or 4 main revenue raises: income tax, national insurance, VAT, and corporation tax. So they're having to scrabble around for things like this. Now, I'm not kind of unaware of the political kind of pressures on things, but like, speaking as an economist, ideally what you'd want people to do is set out their objectives and then design and choose their tax system accordingly, rather than looking at this kind of scrabbling around kind of situation.
So sort of wouldn't start from here kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And do you know what was really interesting to me this morning is some of the messages that we're getting in from listeners on that junk food issue. They're almost also about this need for upfront investment and to reduce the cost later on. So Robert from Leighton says banning junk food ads before 9 p.m. is a good idea, but children and adults as well need to be encouraged to exercise more, maybe more facilities in our local community. And someone else who hasn't given their name says exercise. Stop building on school playing fields. Help children and adults exercise. Everything connects. I can't remember which of the three of you used the word holistic earlier, but that's very much it, isn't it? I've really overrun the first half of this programme because it's such a fascinating chat. Douglas, Hanson, Luke, please stick around. Jane Foley, lots more to talk about. Stay with us. But Dr. Steve Nolan, thank you very much for being part of Wake Up to Money this morning.
Wake up.